Hi, I did a quick sketch to try and show how you might develop up an interior view to try and give you an idea about how the materials work in a building or how you might develop up some ideas of structure, construction, architectural feel from the inside. So when I'm drawing these things up, I usually start with people. Gives you an idea of scale. You can start to think about the occupancy of it, and a lot of times you're kind of judged by your people. If you do rubbish looking people, your whole perspective looks bad. So you've got to you've got to get used to drawing good people. The next thing you've got to remember is that the eye line of adults, at least, is the horizon. So wherever you're standing in the world, if you're looking horizontally, that is your horizon line. So sketching a quick person, and apologies, this is quite light, and in this case I decided to put the vanishing point right in the middle of the guy's head. An easy place to remember. I'm not setting this up properly, it's not a proper perspective. So the next thing I'm doing is trying to sort of draw in the shape of the building. Now this is entirely from my imagination as I'm drawing. I don't have a design to go by. It's all just for kind of explaining for this video. So there'll be weird mistakes all the way through. So once I've got that section thing drawn out, I can go from my vanishing point and draw sketch lines, construction lines, outwards through the corners of my section. I can kind of imagine how the room might be taking shape now. And you can firm that up a little bit, add a wee bit of corrective measures to your lines if you need to. I like to work in pencil to start off. Sometimes moving into ink, but it really depends on how the sketch goes. So at that point I'm starting to think, oh, maybe it might be quite interesting to have a large structural element that comes down and defines the space. So I'm just really kind of roughing that in, maybe some just wee initial lines to think about what the connections might be. And then you can start to make these things three-dimensional. You can bring your sketch lines into or kind of lessen the depth of the perspective drawing, bring the construction back out to where the viewer is, and start to kind of give a bit of shape. Now the depth of a perspective is often difficult to get hold of, and when you're just drawing them freehand without measuring them out, it kind of relies on experience, to be honest, to sort of know where a square is. And once you've got the depth coming towards the camera, you can start to draw other construction lines, and because you've got your lines projecting through your section, you know roughly where they've got to match up. And with a one-point perspective, you're more or less trying to make things parallel. You're not quite. Things are always going to chop and change, but for main elements of structure, vertical lines are vertical. There's only one point going away, so they're not going to recede up to the sky in the same way that looking up at a skyscraper would. So once you've got the kind of basic shape, you can start to play about with it, maybe push elements further out from the construction or further into the construction, and sort of decide on where the back of your perspective drawing's going. So I've got this sort of cranked pitched roof shape with these structural elements there, so I can give them some attention and think about maybe stopping the column shy of the ground there, just sort of putting a wee construction line, thinking about a little sharp pin joint footing to take those columns, and You don't need to add a great deal of detail at this stage, but it's really you're just trying to refine elements as you go. And you can do the same for the corners of any structure. So a perspective is a good opportunity to play about with elements of construction without thinking of them as details. It can be quite difficult to, as an architecture student, just to launch straight in and think about details of how things go together. Could be quite daunting. But if you think about how you want them to appear, that's probably a better place to start. You can consider how two materials come together to provide you with a particular look without having to know exactly how they go together, and you can explore that at a later stage in more detail, looking at how the connections are made and what those materials might be. And then once you've got your kind of rough frame, you've got your main elements put in place, you really want to start adding secondary elements. So this can be sort of window frames or sort of other construction lines that start to describe the space. So I'm sort of thinking about, well, I'm probably going to have some sort of framing behind this the main structure there. I haven't quite decided whether it's a window or it's a panel or not. I can project lines out from the vanishing point to say, well, probably because I've got these main elements of structure, I might have other structural elements, purlins, that pass over the top of the main structure, and kind of sketch them in to say, well, they've got a depth, so they're going to have 2 or 3 lines to help explain what they are. I'm not using a ruler for any of this. It's all kind of just a controlled sketch drawing to try and get the idea of it. The spacing between the purlins is off. I can see that, but that's not of paramount importance. I'm really just trying to sort of figure out what the thing's going to look like from the inside. So we're starting to get a reasonable idea about how this structure might work, and all the time I'm sort of sketching. I'm sort of thinking about what the next point is. So I'm sort of adding in a wee ridge there just to differentiate the point there. And there comes a point in all of these sketch drawings where you want to be able to sort of firm things up and give an extra level of depth. And remember, if you're looking up at elements, you're going to see the underside of them. So it's not just 2 lines. They need a few extra lines, and now's the time to sort of start to firm them up, to give yourself something that makes it look a little bit more realistic. You're trying to show something that's 3-dimensional after all. And I'm sort of working my way through this. A lot of it I don't need to draw. If it's just purely for me to figure something out, I could draw one of these columns or structural elements and leave it at that. But the aim of the drawing is to try and establish what the feel of the space is, what the quality of the space is. And this drawing's in real time. I think it's about 20 minutes long. It took me from start to finish. And if you think about if you can get good at sketching, it's probably more time efficient to sketch on paper to try and figure out the basics of how your building's going to go together before you move into 3D modelling or CAD. That's not to say that people couldn't move directly into a 3D model or a BIM model and kind of establish all these details, but use as many methods as you can. Use the most appropriate methods that you can when you're doing this, and you can work in more detail, add a little bit more depth into elements, firm up kind of key junctions so that we can sort of understand. And some of these times I'm going over lines that I've already gone over, maybe just sort of working in something to give it a little bit more 3-dimensionality. So I'm adding little plates at the bottom of the columns there, and trying to remember that the horizontal lines always go left to right and the vertical lines always go top to bottom. And it's only as they recede into the perspective that things change. So that's why they get the swipes to the side. And I stuck a wee wall in underneath that window there just to hide the bottom of the footing. So I'm now starting to think about what happens at the back of the building. And some sort of form of window fenestration towards the back, curtain walling or something. As I say, this was entirely from my imagination, so it was quite possible it would turn out wrong or odd or strange shapes. But if you don't try these things out, it's 20 minutes out of my life to figure out whether something's nice or not. That seems time well spent to me. So I'm sketching in some windows. Haven't really got an idea about what kind of space this is, or how the rest of it's put in place. Making some decisions about, well, maybe that wall can continue outwards past the glazed wall as a spine wall, and I can kind of sketch in all those elements of curtain walling. And it's sometimes useful to sort of indicate some sort of hatching. So if you're using horizontal cladding or something like that, you can kind of draw all these elements in. So you can add in a whole series of little vertical lines to say that something is a solid surface or not a solid surface, and they don't have to be representative of any particular material. They can just be a hatch. There's no reason why you actually have to be totally realistic within any perspective drawing. It can just be a reminder of what's solid and void. There's also the possibility that you want to represent materials, and you can do that through lines. You could draw yourself a line perspective and scan it into Photoshop and try every material underneath the sun to see whether it works. So there's lots of possibilities from starting from one type of drawing and moving into another type of drawing. But all the time I'm drawing these things, I'm trying to think about how they might go together. And I may not be drawing the panel at that point, but I've kind of got I've got an idea in mind about how the panel material would kind of go together, how those infill panels might work. And because I started with the man, I decide, well, need to firm him up a wee bit. And as I said at the start, people don't need to be perfect, but unfortunately, when you're drawing perspectives, you will be judged on how interesting your people look, or how proportionally correct they look. And I was always, I don't know where the floating head thing came from, but it's now so ingrained in me, and I think it's just the way that I draw people, and it's maybe a can't teach an old dog new tricks type thing. So I always draw little floating heads, and if people are holding hands, their arms connect, and if there's a group of people, they become one outline. So stylistically, you don't have to get people absolutely perfect, but you do need to roughly know how long limbs are and where heads relate to kind of body length to make them look right. But yeah, you can stylistically change them. So I'm working my way around this perspective drawing now, and it's becoming firmer, more definite, and same way that I hatched the back wall, I'm thinking, well, maybe there's some boarding or a ceiling or some other form of infill between those purlins or on top of the purlins that works its way down to form the underside of the ceiling. So that's the material that we would see on the underside there. And I'm not being particularly careful about how to do this. It is a sketch after all, and these are just pencil lines, but it does start to sort of make you think about materials. And it's looking a little bit agricultural just now. It's like the inside of a shed with some curtain walling on it. But it's just a sketch. So thinking about some sort of doorway at the end. I don't know why I didn't draw that in earlier. It seems a bit daft, but stick a door in there. Sort of indicate some sort of handle. That's probably a wee bit too high. And on this side wall, I think, well, it must be, maybe it's some sort of solid material, and because we've got our vanishing point there, we can project a series of lines out from the vanishing point to show how the coursing might work within a wall. So if it's a brick wall or a stone wall or tiles or something, we can get an idea of it sort of quite quickly by doing that, and then a series of vertical lines, because remember all vertical lines in a 1 point perspective run top to bottom. They don't follow a kind of true perspective where they would diverge or converge to the top. So they would all go vertically, and we can add in a whole series of bricks or blocks, and I think I'm thinking it's maybe some kind of stone or ashlar material that's kind of working its way up this wall at that point. And you can continue some of those lines through to the outside. I don't draw everything. And if you want to add a bit of realism to a perspective drawing, and there's nothing worse than perspective drawings with just nothing in them. We want to, after all, show how we're going to occupy a space. And I'm not sure if it's still called this, but when I studied it was called entourage. So this was people and trees and dogs and cats and all sorts of stuff that you could add into spaces, and light fixtures that I'm kind of drawing there. And it's always slightly odd to draw circles in perspective, and you kind of got to fudge them. Not sure that those are the best ellipses I've ever drawn in my life, but for the purposes of this drawing, they seem to do the trick. And there are obviously a couple of big hanging lights that are going to sit down over the space, and sort of underneath them, I think, well, probably some sort of table, which is probably way too big when I draw it. Yeah, it's far too big. Draw a big kind of elliptical table, but it's maybe a sort of big meeting table, and with a big round base, which does not need to be the same size as the tabletop. I don't know what I was thinking when I drew that. And then you've got a couple of people, so you want to show how that sort of thing's used. They're maybe sitting on high stools, so you have to sort of think about how you can indicate those people in the same sort of way that you might draw your other people around. So a couple of stools, a couple of people in the space, and they give scale to the back of the image, so that you can say, well, even though I've got the man with the wee boy in the front there, we've got a few people in the background to say, this gives it a bit of depth. We can see how they're occupying the space, and there's something happens at the back that we want to tell you about. And there's a key thing to sort of drawing people. You usually have to put somebody in the close foreground as well, and they don't all have to fit within the frame. So here's a fairly hefty guy getting drawn here, probably too wide. But all of their heads line up. So if you're standing in a room and you look across the room and everyone else is standing, generally if you're all the same height, your eyes will be at the same level, and that's the horizon level. So to make sure your perspectives look right, you have to kind of make sure that all the heads are on the horizon level, and it's the feet and the scale that gives them depth. So that's how they kind of recede into the background. So as I kind of get towards the end of this, we can firm up some lines. We're really just drawing with a kind of heavier hand into some of these elements, and saying, well, the kind of important things we want to pick out are the crossbars, and heavy line sort of work in the same way as shadows do. So they give a bit of emphasis to your drawings. You don't need to shade absolutely everything. You can sketch these things in. And it's probably also that since I added the hatching, some of the lines that I had kind of appeared, that were lost a little bit. And for this drawing, I'm not entirely sure why I did this. I don't usually add shade. I don't think it's particularly necessary. I knew what was open area and what was closed area, but you can add some light shade as much as you see fit. And it's always good to remember that you can shade over things, because most pencils have an eraser on the end, and you can kind of block out some of that shading, and bring in a couple of extra tones. So I'm picking out the windows here with the shade, and assuming that everything in the background is going to get this shade over the top, and I just fly over that guy's head, and I can come in afterwards and pick it out with the rubber. So I think if I was going to work into this a bit more, I would probably have changed the shade ever so slightly. I think the heavier shade towards the end of that bit there was better. So that's the finished sketch. It doesn't need to be too much. You do not need to overwork it. Okay, so thanks very much for watching, and I hope that was of some help to you.